The sun is the world's life giver. It provides energy to the surface of the planet, and all life has evolved under its influence. Hormones are regulated, circadian rhythms are controlled, blood pressure is balanced, breeding is influenced, communication is made possible, skin is healed, viruses are destroyed, and even brain function is enhanced, all under sunlight. Some animals and all plants will quite literally die if they don't get access to the sun. And it's the start of the food chain in 100% of cases. So it's safe to say sunlight is pretty important. And when we bring an animal into our homes, one of the responsibilities that we put onto ourselves is the ability to be able to replicate sunlight in our homes in captivity. So I'm sure you'll agree it's not something we should cheap out on, or not something we should try and cut corners with at any point. And one product that claims to do it all is this, the noble Mercury Vapor Lamp, or combi bulb. But can we really replicate the sun with just one bit of tech? Well, that's the topic of today's video, so let's get into it. If you've kept exotic animals for any length of time, then you've probably come across a combi bulb. They're super common for tortoises and even for marmosets here in the UK. And I've even seen videos with them being used on monitors and large pythons in the US. And there's plenty of videos online of people showing them off and saying they're the best lamp and the best thing you can buy for your animal. Now, those are some pretty bold claims. They work using quite an interesting piece of technology. Inside the glass bulb is a little tube called an arc tube, and inside that is a chemical called mercury. And when the lamp is turned on, a surge of electricity is passed through the tube and the mercury vaporizes. And when mercury vaporizes, it emits light to some extent. And the light that the mercury is emitting is what we're shining down onto our animals from the bulb. The problem with the light that the mercury gives off is the quality or the spectrum of the light. There are well-documented emission points of mercury when it vaporizes, and you can search these by just doing a quick Google search. If we take a look at an image of the rainbow of the sun's spectrum from UVB to infrared, you can see the sun emits this whole range of colours, and it emits these pretty consistently in the full range. And now if I turn that into a background and I show you what the light from a mercury vapor lamp is, you can quickly see that it's not quite the same. And these are the mercury emission lines. They're the only light that the lamp can properly emit. And you can see that technically speaking, it does emit some UVB, it does emit some UVA, it does emit some visible light and some infrared, but it's nothing like sunlight. And we tend to find that these lamps have a really low colour rendering index, often around 20 or 30 out of 100. And you don't even need a special machine to tell you that, you can just look at it. The light looks really green and strange. Does that look like sunlight to you? And then what about a reptile that has tetrachromatic vision, or those marmosets where the males and females have different colour vision to each other? How on earth do they see this thing? And the truth is, we don't really know. But what we do know is that it's really not like sunlight. And I know these lamps have been used for many, many years, especially in reptile keeping. And they saved the lives of so many reptiles back in the day. They protected us from metabolic bone disease when it was really rife in the industry. But it's precisely that, it was back in the day. And nowadays, there are much better options for providing UVB, visible light, and infrared. But the fact that the colour is a bit funky isn't the only reason not to love these lamps. There's actually some reasons that are quite serious. On some videos online, you'll see people using one of these, a solar meter, and they'll put it under the lamp and measure the UVI that they get from the lamp. And they'll claim that the higher number means a better quality or a better lamp overall. And what these people in the videos completely fail to mention is that the solar meter just reads UVI, and UVI is an index of how much sunburn-causing radiation there is from a given lamp. You can actually get a really high UVI rating from a UVC sterilization lamp, and that's definitely not something you want to put over your animal. Now, I've spoken about this plenty of times, so I won't really go into it here. You can read about it on the website. What I'm trying to say is that I've tested these lamps under controlled conditions, including ones claiming to be specially designed for American voltages or UK voltages. And the following statement rings true for all of them, regardless of brand. You pose a serious risk of under or overexposing your animal to UVB when using these lamps. Now, it's true that all lamps technically have a risk, but it's so much greater in these lamps that I genuinely think it's something that needs to be considered. And it's partly down to the fact that the UVI can't be controlled independent of the infrared radiation that comes off these lamps. For example, if you want to expose your animal to, say, UVI 3, then you need to have the lamp a set distance away. Now, this isn't that strange, but alongside that, you may then be providing the incorrect level of infrared from the same lamp. Equally, if you base the positioning on your infrared levels, or even your temperature levels, you could be then over or underexposing your animal to UVB. And to put that into perspective of what it means to be too close to the light, here's some measurements that I've taken, and you can see there is clear UVC emitted from these lamps at close range. And I can't even begin to say the amount of times I've seen online animals sat ridiculously close to these lamps. And those animals are certainly being exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. But let me be clear on what I'm saying. All UVB lamps pose a risk if used incorrectly. The issue is that mercury vapor lamps, you have a much higher chance of exposing your animal to those dangerous wavelengths. As I say, I've tested these lamps from a whole host of brands, and it's clear from my tests that all of the brands exhibit the same issues. Not only that, build quality is inconsistent across the board. Every single brand I've tested has a different output from different lamps in the same batch, same wattage, same box, everything is the same, but the output is totally different even between two identical lamps. And as I say, I've tested these kinds of lamps from a whole host of brands. Some of the papers are on the website. And my tests, as well as the tests from other people, show one major problem is that the build quality is inconsistent regardless of brand. You could take two bulbs that are identical in every way, the box, the manufacturer, but you put them next to each other, burn them in for the same amount of time, and they have a different reading at the same distance. That is a major issue because it means that I can't give you advice on how far away you need to have your lamp based on which lamp you've got, because the one you've got could be massively different, even though it's technically identical. And then the UVI changes day to day anyway. I've had lamps where I'm getting a UVI of 50 one day, come back 24 hours later, and at the same distance it's a UVI of 2 or 3. And then the next day it's different again. Sure, they seem easy enough. Screw them in, turn them on, off you go. But there's so much that could go wrong. You could cook your animal or accidentally expose them to really dangerous short wavelengths. And those really short wavelengths of UVB and UVC are dangerous to skin and eyes. And then you pair this risk with the spectrum, which is not like sunlight at all. And it seems that the only benefit is for the keeper and not for the animal. I do want to go through some of the most common things we see said about these lamps and kind of give my feedback on the most common arguments that I see for them. But before I do that, I do want to just say thank you so much for everyone who watches the videos, liked all the videos, shared all the videos, and even donated. You can go to www.tamascus.co.uk/donate, and you can donate as little as much as you want. And the donations of people over the last few months have actually bought these snazzy new microphones that I've got. That's pretty cool. So thank you so much to everybody who's donated and got some better audio quality. Is this good? Does it sound good? But not only that, you're also paying for my time to be able to test these lamps independently of the manufacturers. So every donation really does help. But again, there's no obligation to do that. You could help by liking the video, sharing the video to your Facebook group, or just sharing it amongst friends. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the most common things we see said about mercury vapor lamps online. They're useful in some settings. Of course, there will always be people who say these lamps are useful in some settings. And those people aren't necessarily wrong as long as you know the lamp is emitting a safe spectrum and you're measuring the UVI. It can be used alongside other lamps to create a wider spectrum or a boost of UV in a certain area. However, the vast majority of people are not doing this, and they're using these lamps as a single lamp source in an enclosure, and that is not suitable. I've used them for years with no problems. This is the biggest argument I see all the time, is that people have used these for years with no issues. And this is the classic argument for poor husbandry across the board. You see it with 40-gallon tanks for bearded dragons. You see it with feeding tomatoes to Hermann's tortoises. Everybody says, I've done this for a long time and thus it must be okay. And this excuse gets really boring after you've seen it a few times. This sort of person is usually completely unaccepting of new technology and new understanding of technology as time moves on. Let me try and put it this way. Mercury vapor lamps are a technology that has existed for over 100 years. In its modern form, maybe 30 or 40 years. Do you still use the same television technology you used 30 or 40 years ago? Do you still use the same computer you had 30 or 40 years ago? Or your mobile phone, is that the same as it was 30 or 40 years ago? No. Time moves on, and so does technology with animal keeping. There's a really old adage where people say, I'm old school, whereas I say you're outdated. If they're so bad, why do brands keep making them? This is a very valid argument. Respectable brands like Arcadia, Zoomed, they have new lamps out all the time. In fact, Arcadia brought a new mercury vapor out just a few years ago. And the truth is, it's about money. It's one of those catch-22 problems. If Arcadia stopped selling mercury vapor bulbs, people would just go and buy the one from an opposing brand. And that wouldn't look very good for annual sales figures. So the brands need to all agree to stop, or be forced by legislation to stop, or the problem won't go away. You could say the same about coloured lamps, which all the brands continue to make and all the brands continue to sell. You could say the same about the insistence of advertising heat projectors as basking lamps, or saying halogens contain UVA. All of these things are problems, and until they all stop doing them, nobody's going to stop. The bottom line there is that just because a company sells a product doesn't mean it's suitable. I know my animal best and I give them the best. They are happy. Again, this is the same sort of defense we see from poor husbandry across the board. And again, it gets boring when you've heard it a few times. You could ask what metrics people are using to measure their welfare. Are they insisting on using the 5 domains? Are they conducting welfare audits? And are they checking blood results? Of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But asking people these things just makes them defensive or angry. And those sorts of people tend to have already made up their mind, which is a real shame because they will never end up spending this much time looking into the lamps and the welfare they're providing for their animals. In those situations, I implore people to actually do some looking into independent test results of the things they're using for their animals, including mercury vapor bulbs. And those are results like the ones I've got posted on the website. I use these and my vet says he's healthy and the light is the best. There is no veterinary college in the world that I'm aware of that offers bespoke, specialist training in lighting. Vets are trained in medicine and anatomy. They're doctors, and they're absolutely fantastic doctors, but they're not welfare specialists, or even husbandry specialists. I actually run CPD courses designed for vets in the UK, where I teach them about lighting, because they just don't know. And you should stick with your vet for veterinary advice. That's what they're for. Smart people know their limitations, and any good vet will say, I don't know anything about this, you're going to have to find someone who does. Then what should I use? This is actually a really good question, or at least the start of a really good question. And this is the sort of question people should ask themselves before they even get into the idea of lighting their animal, before they even buy their animal in the first place. And if you remember back to the start of the video, I made reference to the sun and its magical powers of life-giving energy to the world, and that's true. So our job is to replicate that as best as possible. So we need lamps that specialize in producing parts of the spectrum that replicate the sun. For example, the research and development that goes into modern phosphoblends on UVB lamps is unreal, and that's speaking from experience for the last 18 months of working on them. And there's some pretty high quality LEDs on the market that produce UVA, and that means that reptiles can finally see white. Stick those alongside a really high quality incandescent light source and you've pretty much replicated the sun. But as with everything, there isn't one size fits all. And the lamps you should use depend on your setup, your animal, and your budget. And this is why it's so vital that when you're asking what lamps should I use, you provide as much information as possible about your setup. If you've asked what should I use and somebody's given you an answer without any sort of clarification as to what your current setup is like, then don't trust their answer, because there isn't one size that fits all. How can they possibly know what lamp you should use unless they know more about your setup? But what about you? Have you had one of these crazy arguments made to you? Do you make these crazy arguments? Do you use mercury vapor lamps? Have you moved away from mercury vapor lamps? Let me know your thoughts and your ideas down in the comments. Feel free to pop us a thumbs up or even a thumbs down if you really want to. And consider subscribing. If there's something specific you want to see a light report on or even a video on, then again, let me know in the comments down below. But for now, I will see you when I see you.